What do most people get to partake of? A little bowl of rice? I mean, we've got a world of hungry people, and meat isn't something that should be farmed on the scale it's being farmed in Brazil, deforestation. I mean, it's a big cycle right now. You know, we're still raping and pillaging. We want to talk about conservation, but what do? It's not going to get better until it gets worse, I'm afraid. Because this whole thing is like, we need the revolution. We need a food revolution. We need to get rid of food deserts in cities where people can't, they're so poor, there's nothing fresh available for them to eat. We're putting people in boxes. We need to open up those boxes. I'm Joan Montier. I'm Joan Montier. You're Pierre-Louis Montier.
Pierre-Louis Montier.
Okay.
We are the owners of Montier Fromagerie, which is a small goat and sheep dairy located in Dayton. The cheese we make is a blend of sheep and goat milk. We've been doing the dairy for 16 years now.
This was empty, vacant land that we bought. Well, it wasn't vacant, it had car bodies and garbage all over it, but that's how this dairy particularly started, was to leave the chemical world of agribusiness and come into being what is now getting coined sustainable, which was really how our forefathers lived before the chemical revolution came.
It's not agriculture, it's agribusiness, and that's a different style, that's a different level. It's not a healthy life when you have overcrowded and industrial food. It's not healthy, basically. And the problem that a lot of people don't question where the food comes from, and they accept anything they are fed, and it's not obviously healthy for the population.
So we're going backwards. We're not really doing anything that unusual. If we were 100 years ago, we would all be living more like we did.
So everything is basically organic. We just use the natural cycles of the sheep for birthing and milking, and so it's just following the season, following the life cycle, basically. We can control what's happening to a point, but you can have a lot more control than if you deal with thousands of animals. So if you're a small farmer, you can, it's easier to manage and to give a good lifestyle to the animal.
And respect. I mean, do we respect animals enough? We're all equal. Our animals that, like I was telling you before, we haven't eaten industrial meat for years. Well, it takes a lot of strength when you raise animals for your own consumption. If they're mistreated, they're not going to be happy meat in the freezer. You can tell an animal has been mistreated, and industrial farming is really part of why we do what we do, is to totally stay away from having to eat that kind of processed food.
Why people are concerned about the food they are eating if they know it's industrial food. So how far do you take it?
Vegans, bless their little hearts. I don't know how they get enough good food in them, but,
My name is Arthur Shamet. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am a junior gender studies major, and I'm a vegan.
And I'm Joel Ponce, also he, him, his, senior music theory major, and I'm also a vegan. I don't really see a difference between eating animal meat. There's some people that put quotation marks over the word meat because that takes it away from what the animal actually is or what the animal actually was, and all of a sudden it just becomes this food thing that we consume. Well, I started off being vegetarian. I think that first came from an animal rights perspective, and the more that I learned about factory farming and small-scale farming as well, saw how all of that was, the treatment of animals was still negative, even producing milk or producing other animal products, so that I couldn't really separate my my views on the rights of animals and the production of meat versus the production of milk or the other products when people consume that are animal derived.
I think that we have this kind of distraction and fascination with animal products whose ultimate end goal is death, and I think that that kind of elides the fact that all of them lead to death, and that it's only a matter of whether a consumption of it directly leads to that death, because at the end of the day, these non-human animals are being literally produced specifically for the purpose of being used until they die. I think in the context of animal agriculture that the question of treatment is very much dodging the question, because I think that debates over free-range meat or cage-free eggs avoid the fundamental question of whether or not it's appropriate to treat animals as commodities, and I think that it's something that people who do eat meat are then able to use to justify their meat consumption and to kind of assuage their guilt about their awareness about how the beef is made, the bacon is made, whatever that phrase is. And so I think that the more we can get away from this language of treatment and the more that we can get away from this language of justness, I think it's a good place to be. And as far as the issue of pets and zoos, I ultimately think that it's probably immoral to own pets. I think that while animals can consent, I don't think we can ever recognize when they're consenting. And while I think that in the short term it's morally justified to take in pets who would otherwise be euthanized, I don't think that in an ultimate animal liberation world that having pets, that having zoos can really be morally justified. I think that the reason that I eat the way I eat, as a gender studies major, I believe that the personal is political, and so I don't think that there's really a delineation between whether veganism is a personal choice or whether veganism is an intentional decision to participate in a political movement. I find veganism, as someone who strongly believes in intersectional feminism and anti-racism and disability rights, to be the single most powerful thing I can do to make an active decision every single hour of every single day to work for nonviolence, to work for social justice. And I see animal agriculture as just one part of this intersectional fabric of the ways that we treat difference, the ways that we commodify difference, and I think that it's so intricately tied up with all the other causes that I care about, and we don't always have time to go to protests, we don't always have time to go to rallies and write letters, but we always have time to make decisions about the food that we eat. I think that the fundamental ethical question of veganism is bodily consent and bodily autonomy, and I think that eating meat is something that you do to someone else's body without their consent, and I think that it's very hard to justify making a decision to violate someone else's bodily autonomy, and so I'm not particularly sold on ideas of cultural obstacles to veganism, because while I recognize them and acknowledge their significance, I think that the bodily autonomy and basic principles of affirmative consent ultimately trump that. And that's probably my most controversial vegan view.
Sure, I wouldn't want to say that everybody should become a vegan because I can't ever see myself doing it any differently, and I do think that it's just tied to ethics. I do think that it's tied to human rights as much as animal rights. But I also recognize that some people don't have access, against food deserts, to getting food that is actually vegan, that is actually healthy, that is actually affordable. For me it's always this tricky space to be in because I am a poor student, I'm a person of color, and there's not many of us that are vegans, and not many of us that are actually outspoken in being one, so that I never feel comfortable actually telling somebody, oh, you should be a vegan too, or never feel comfortable calling somebody out for eating bacon in front of me. I don't, and it's not that I don't disagree with or not that I agree with their food choices, but rather that I know that it's a lot more complicated, and I can't just convince somebody right then and there that they should be eating like me, because it might be connected against their cultural identities, or maybe connected to just the fact that they don't have the access or to first the education and then to the actual food practices that they might want to follow so that they can eat their ethics.
Even vegetables now, if you buy it at the grocery store, they can say it's organic, but how many hands have touched that food? Here we go back to the local. We're so lucky to have these local farmers around that want to feed our population. They can't do it by themselves, but we're gaining. If you find out what you believe in your life, in terms of food values, if you don't eat food with corn syrup in it, if if you don't, suck down those 20-ounce gulps. But all this stuff is your own choice, and that's for the consumer. Again, being a young person, they need to learn that from the beginning. It's making that choice. If you're going to eat meat, what meats? So we raise our own chickens. We use no corn. They're fed garbanzos, beans that we soak in the whey from the cheese.
Totally free range.
It's totally free range. It's like every single thing will show you how it wants to live. Animals are really quite intelligent, and you don't make pets out of the ones that you're raising for your own consumption. You can be friendly with them, but I don't put names to them.
We love them twice.
They only have one bad
They
day.
have only one bad day. Don't waste it. It's not killing for killing's sake.
And I think there's also questions of would you be vegan if all of animal exploitation or animal rights weren't being violated? As we talked about, that's kind of unavoidable. But if if it was all just farm labor and small-scale farms and people raised their own food and their own livestock, would that be a world in which you would want to, or you would consider eating meat again? But again, it's tied to a lot more things than just simple animal rights issues. Not that those are simple, but rather they seem simplistic when you're trying to tie in everything else and looking at the world as a whole. When I was learning more about being vegan, and the longer that I stayed being vegetarian and was looking up more of these issues, it became not just about animal rights. It almost immediately became not just about animal rights. It became about farm worker rights and agriculture, environmental rights, food deserts, all of these things that we don't really think about in terms of access and how it's affecting marginalized cultures or marginalized groups of people. And I think I can't remove myself from the ethics of fighting for the liberation of one thing without fighting for the liberation of other. And even being vegan, I don't think is, the end goal for it all. As I said, I would never go to an extreme. Just because it's vegan doesn't mean it's cruelty-free, and that transcends into my not choosing to eat bananas, not choosing to eat chocolate, all of these other luxury items that we consume because we can, but we don't think about where they're coming from or how they're being sourced from child labor in West Africa and Latin America. So that the more that I learn about this, I think that being vegan really helps me to stay aware, really helps me to continue to think about all of these issues, and every time that I eat, I have to think about what I'm doing and how it's connected to how I want to eat my ethics. My idea would be that one day I could learn how to photosynthesize and I wouldn't even have to consume anything in the world. Hopefully that will happen. Who knows? Science in the future. Whatever.